Now I'd like to invite Nicola to take the floor.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to start by thanking ODI and Anna in particular for allowing this event to happen and allowing us to present our research findings here. But I'd also like to make a confession that this isn't a result of a research project that's had a specific life and with the research findings, the report, but rather aspects of cash transfers that are important to us at Save the Children that we have been exploring and that we'd like to explore further. And it's a combination of work that we've been doing in our policy work and also from our programming and some recent evaluations. So the aim of the presentation is to look at the social relations that influence the way that children are impacted by cash transfers, and I'll do this in three ways. But firstly, by looking at the role of intra-household dynamics. Secondly, by looking at the impact of cash transfers on household composition and care of children. And lastly, a bit more briefly, looking at the impact of on social networks and community dynamics. And this is very much ongoing research. So in the presentation, there are some questions that I think are still unanswered and something that we would like to look into further, but also would be interested to hear your perspectives from it. And it's based on a range of different sources from literature, from Lessons for Save the Children's programming, from evaluations in Kenya and Malawi, which I'll talk about in more detail in a bit, and also from Young Lives data, which is a longitudinal study of poverty dynamics of children. So the programs, these are just 4 of the programs that are discussed in this, but as it brings in some other literature, there are other programs as I mentioned. But 2 of them are Save the Children's programs, a program in southern Niger, a cash transfer pilot that was targeted to 1,500 poor households, and these households were identified using a household economy approach to vulnerability analysis, which represented 1/3 of the population of that community, and there was priority given to mothers and carers of children under 5. Also a pilot in South Sudan that targeted 1,400 vulnerable households, so 8% of the community there, and was a combination of cash for work and unconditional transfers. Thirdly, a couple of evaluations. Kenya cash transfers for OVCs, which is implemented by the government of Kenya with assistance from UNICEF. And it draws on a recent evaluation from OPM, and it's good to see Ian from OPM here, who I think has also been looking at the social impacts of resulting from the study. And also the Malawi Social Cash Transfer Programme, again from the government of Malawi, that was targeted to ultra-poor and labour-constrained households, and this draws on the evaluation by Boston University and the Centre for Social Research at the University of Malawi. So starting with the intra-household dynamics. In general, it's clear that the intra-household dynamics influence the distribution of resources and decision-making within the household. And the distribution is determined by many different aspects, both at the individual and household level, but also the social and cultural norms. So aspects of this the extent to gender equality and decision-making power of the mother or the main carer, level of education of family decision makers and of women in the household, and of individual status, birth order, gender and age in particular. And there's been some evidence that children in orphaned and vulnerable children who are in foster households may be discriminated against compared to other members of the household. And also important aspects of polygamous households and the fact that the position of the mother and the child that act as one social unit is in relation to other wives within the household. And also something which I think is very important, that the distribution of resources may be unequal, but this may be part of a rational investment strategy. So, for example, it might be responding to the fact that men in the household are working on public work schemes or other labouring, and therefore are getting more nutrition, getting better food quantity, or that due to societal values, the education of boys may be seen as more important to the education of girls. And so this is something to bear in mind in designing the cash transfer program. So cash transfers tend to be targeted at the household level, and it's generally assumed that this will mean that different members of the household will benefit. So in order to ensure that that is happening, it's important to look at the distribution of impacts between the groups within the household. In particular, for improved food security throughout the household, it requires some equity in the distribution of benefits. And I've got a suggestion here that how cash transfers are labelled may also impact on the distribution. So if it's got children in its name, then whether that influences the preferences, and that's one of the questions that I've slipped in there. I don't know the answer to, but it'd be interesting to find that out. And there is evidence of impact on children's well-being, suggesting that there is some positive distribution resulting from cash transfers within the household. And there's also evidence of differential impacts on girls and boys. So, for example, Young Lives has some information on different time use impacts on girls and boys. In the cash transfer for OVCs, the Kenya program, it was reported that in the majority of households, in 71% of the households, all household members benefited from the payment. And in Malawi, there was the data found that there was improved food security throughout the household, suggesting that as a result of the transfer, food was purchased for all the family. And lastly, from the Niger evaluation, again there was improved diversity throughout the household, and particularly evident on improved diet diversity of young children. 80% of the households were able to enrich the milk with millet-based gruel, which is usually given to young children, compared to 50% of households before the project. And this I won't go into too much detail. I think it's been discussed in more detail by Gabby. Is the importance of program design, and this is very often discussed in relation to the intra-household dynamics, and the fact that based on the evidence of improved child health and a positive impact on intra-household resource allocation, cash transfers are often channel resources directly to women. And this is also based around the potential to equalise bargaining power within the household and the potential for empowerment. In both the Kenya and Malawi examples, women weren't designated as the preferred beneficiaries, but female-headed households tended to be enrolled at higher rates, basically related to the program eligibility criteria. And in Kenya, it was found that the main caregiver decided how to use the transfer, either alone or in consultation with other members of the household. And similarly, in Malawi, the majority of households, there was no spouse, and households heads made spending decisions on their own. And this implied that women alone made the financial decision in 60% of the households. I think this is important just to show that even without necessarily saying that transferring resources directly to women, that the program design and the eligibility may imply that that's how the program progresses. And there's evidence from the South Africa pension of improved nutritional status of children, especially if the transfer is given to women. And from a pension in Brazil, that the gender of the beneficiary of the pension results in differential impacts on girls and boys. And a few perspectives from Save the Children's programming on gender and inter-household dynamics. In South Sudan, the cash transfer program, by targeting women, it was found that the program contributed to female empowerment. Unfortunately, I don't have any further information on how that was measured, but that was what was found through the program. And in Zimbabwe, it was found to be a positive impact on household dynamics, and this was reported as improved spousal communication, joint decision-making, reported feelings of independence, and increased influence on household expenditure. And the Swaziland Emergency Cash Transfer Expenditure Programme found that there were concerns around gender-based violence from distributing to women, and they were proved to be unfounded. And the reason was that most men accepted that women spend cash sensibly, and this is one of the quotes from the programme, from the evaluation. And I won't go through this in very much detail, but conditionality can also impact on the intra-household dynamics by having conditions on the expenditure to different types of health or aspects that relate to children. Although, just as an aside, there are other aspects to conditionality that would also need to be considered. Cash versus in-kind transfers may have different impacts on distribution within the household. And those are the two I will leave for now. Secondly, the second area is cash transfers and the impact on household composition and care within the household. Kinship care, which is the care of children with extended family and close networks of orphans and vulnerable children, is particularly prevalent in Africa and Asia, and especially with grandparents. And it's found that there are enormous benefits for children. However, there's evidence that the carers often struggle to cope with a lack of access to support. And there's also a concern that support for kinship care may encourage relatives to care for children solely for material gains, and whether that would necessarily reflect a good care arrangement for the children involved. I think pension programs have found a lot of evidence of impacts on children and changing household structures as a result of them. Migration is often also seen as a coping strategy, and households often send children to live with relatives or other households, especially in times of shocks, for example. And the cash transfer may enable children to return or adults to join the household in order to benefit from the transfer. So using a couple of examples from Kenya and Malawi, OVCs were almost entirely retained within the extended family and community in programme and comparison areas, and it's important to say that that was one of the objectives of the programme. And there was some difference found in the poorest households, but in general there was little difference between programme and comparison areas, because it was very much what was happening before the programme and very much part of the culture. But it's found from improvements in child wellbeing indicators that there's likely to have been an impact on the standard of living of children in those households. In Malawi, there was some evidence of an increase in kinship care, although this wasn't statistically significant, so it'd be useful to look at the longer-term impacts of this. And some tentative evidence on childbearing in Kenya, where there's found that there's been no evidence of an impact of the cash transfer on childbearing as a result of that programme. In terms of the cash transfers and social networks, there's an important impact on household well-being from the social networks themselves, especially in situations of acute distress. And these are often weak, particularly for vulnerable households. The social networks are found to create status, contribute to social capital and access to resources, and build trust and community. And it's interesting to see whether cash transfers have a positive or negative impact on social networks. It's often argued that formal social protection crowds out informal, so it'd be interesting to explore this further. Kenya, there was found to be a 10% decline in external assistance, and questions around whether this was a result of the household being perceived as less needy. And similarly in Malawi, there's less evidence of external support. In Niger, it was found that it wasn't really the poorest using from the household economy approach that were benefiting from these informal systems. So even if the formal social protection is crowding out the informal, is this necessarily a bad thing? Yeah. In terms of a couple of conclusions from this point, there's the analysis of the social impacts is important in order to examine some of the concerns around social protection on childbearing and child rearing, and also crowding out of informal networks. This sort of evidence shows the importance of program design, and depending on the objectives of the program and the context. It's important to have more impact evaluations to further explore these issues, including disaggregated analysis, particularly to show the intra-household dynamics on different members within the family and on gender within the household, and the importance of qualitative research. And I'd just like to back up what Gabby was saying earlier about the importance of greater funding, particularly into qualitative research. And this is something that we will be planning to look into in more detail through a project that provides technical assistance to impact evaluations with a variety of partners to promote shared learning and comparative analysis across thematic areas. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much,